Welcome, welcome everybody. Hope you are doing well wherever you are. David Griscom here with this week's Griscom stream. Sorry that things have been a little topsy turvy this week, but I want to make sure that I was able to come out here and speak to folks for a little bit. I'll definitely be scanning the chat. Oh Lord, my dog is missing me something fierce. But I want to make sure that just because the stream got canceled on Tuesday, that we still talk this week. Obviously, it's been an extremely unpredictable and difficult time, and I wanted to hear from y'all what y'all are thinking. Um, so we're certainly going to be talking a lot about Ukraine and Russia. Um, but I first wanted to start just since there has been so much bad news, by also reminding folks that we certainly stand in solidarity with our trans family and friends here in Texas. Obviously the war news has been, getting a lot of attention, and rightfully so. But during this time, if you're not familiar, Greg Abbott has basically pursued a position along with the extremely anti-human, anti-freedom Texas GOP to crack down on families and people who are trans, and particularly threaten children who are threaten children with being ripped away from their families, ripped away from their parents if their parents support them in any kind of gender affirmation or gender affirmation surgery. Um, I just wanted to start off the show with that because this has also been an extreme shock for folks, and it should be taken seriously. I don't know yet the best way to help push back beyond showing support and supporting groups both with our solidarity and with our funds that have been on the ground fighting for LGBTQ rights here. Um, I know in my life experience as somebody who was raised in the queer community here in Texas, that the only thing that can beat these kind of bigots is community and standing with one another and not being silent. I just want people to remind folks that know that we can fight again back against these forces of reaction, and we have to build community to fight against these monsters. And beyond that, we'll be certain to cover it more as things start to develop and we start to find more viable ways to push back. But I want to start there and also note that it truly is a sad state of affairs here. That politically, and this comes when you when the opposition has failed as much as it has, unfortunately, politically, both like people like Abbott and Dan Crenshaw and all these kind of like super far right figures, they are much more worried about securing their far right flank. Abbott looks like Abbott's certainly going to win, the GOP nomination for governor, but he's had to spend these past few months, even deepening his reactionary agenda, to to curry favor with this very, very rabid far right base that has been cultivated here. And, it's something that we should all be watching very carefully, because, if the only people that, state elected officials here are worried about is the more far right side of the GOP base, then we have very, very dark times ahead. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming by. I know I'm sure everyone's been, talking and sort of working through these things throughout the week. I'm definitely here to just basically take questions. I have a hard out today in about 30 minutes, but I would like to hear from y'all what you're thinking. So I'm already looking for questions, but I just wanted to start by saying on the Ukraine question, and people feel free to jump in the chat because I want to be able to responding and hearing what y'all are thinking. But just at the start, I just want to say this is the worst possible reality. The worst possible reality, and I'm really fearful right now that it's going to get worse for the Ukrainian people. I can only express my deep solidarity and hope that the senseless violence and bloodshed is able to end as soon as possible, and that there's a full evacuation of Russian troops from Ukraine. That's it, full stop. I also want to express solidarity with all of the anti-war protesters in Russia I believe somewhere around 40 cities, over 1,000 people have been arrested so far. That has been a really inspiring, turn of events in extremely, extremely dark times. Um, and there's a lot to get to, so I want to hear everyone's like specific concerns and questions on it. But I just want to say, um, you know, I, I was wrong in the sense that I did not think that Putin would escalate things to this level, and I certainly didn't think that he was going to pursue the complete madness that is this land invasion of Ukraine. I'm still quite shocked. I'm quite shocked that diplomacy really did fail, and in a lot of avenues it wasn't properly tried. But certainly, especially with things as they've accelerated over this past week, I've truly been in a state of disbelief. Because as I said time and time again, quoting some that I had heard Bronco say, both sides were really playing with fire, and it took a madman to really pursue and you know the pursued like the worst and most destructive possible option. And it's hard to see the off ramps here. I think that the only thing that we can call for on the left right now is for no war, no American or NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine, and also a full evacuation of the Russian military presence in Ukraine as well. I fear that things have just accelerated to such a point that it's hard to see where this is able to end. Um, but yeah, I mean, predictions are certainly difficult right now. But I wanted to see. Let me check what everybody's saying before we go too far um, down the line. Um, and yeah, I guess some folks were responding to Texas. Dakota says MR made a good point about Texas anti-trans stuff. That now more than ever, it's clear that this is a culture war issue. It's about fundamental human rights. I don't doubt that at all. And Rachel, who I am happy to hear from, said 51 cities last that they heard. And it's good to see you, Rachel, and hope that you're safe. Mario says Finland and Sweden are now applying to join NATO after Russia's attack on Ukraine. Putin has voiced threats towards them, both EU members. Thoughts? Well, I didn't hear that. I've seen that there's a pivot, but I'm very. One thing I have to be really careful while we're doing this live stream is that there's so much that's coming in. I mean, just in the past hour, we saw that there's going to be a scrambling of NATO forces into Eastern Europe, right, into NATO countries, right. So things are developing really, really quickly. So I'm hesitant to comment on things until I've been able to look at them more in depth. From what I saw before, I saw that there were Russian threats against Finland and Sweden if they pursue NATO membership, but I did not see anything more than that. About them formally trying to join. So I'm just saying I need to be able to see these things. And I think it's important not to speculate. But I'll say this, like, I still think that the refusal on the West side to negotiate on NATO, has been a huge mistake and has been a big part of accelerating this crisis. But it's also very clear now that Putin is operating on a kind of double agenda, that only makes it more viable and more desirable for certain countries to want to join NATO even more so than before. So that's what I can say about that right now. But I would like to see more. Puda says, David, should NATO take in Ukraine membership off the table? Do you think NATO membership for them is even realistic? Could dropping that goal have helped avoid this? I think so. And I think it's important not to over-determine this, because I think that some folks have gotten to a point where they're not really paying attention to the situation on the ground. But the thing is that NATO never really wanted Ukraine to be in NATO because of the territorial issues within the country, obviously because of other threats as well. And no reasonable person, this is the point, even people who are very pro NATO would say this, like no reasonable person wanted to actually extend NATO membership to Ukraine, which is why, in my opinion, the kind of refusal from the Biden administration and the West to actually negotiate on it. I mean, that's the last hours before Putin just, pursued his descent into complete madness and bloodshed and horror. The Biden administration again said that they're not going to negotiate um, on on um, on the NATO question regarding Ukraine. They said that there's no plans immediately, but instead of making a commitment to have a hard line there, they refuse to do that. And I think that there's no doubt that you can't say at this point that all attempts on that side were made, to prevent this kind of madness and barbarism. And that's not both sidesing. That's recognizing the situation, and how we got here. Right. That doesn't, like, just because Putin is saying that he's going to invade this country if they consider joining NATO doesn't justify him invading, Ukraine. But you have to understand that there are off ramps. That I think could have been more vigorously pursued. And I think at this point, especially now, as we're trying to, hopefully be able to advocate for a situation where Russian troops leave Ukraine and there is an immediate ceasefire. Um, you know, I think that an agreement like that would be much better off than a continued war in that part of the world. Um, Emo friend at Twitch says, Emo Dragon. So, what are your thoughts on commentators or streamers that are floating about being right? It almost seems to me that they were only right because they didn't have a healthy skepticism of mainstream and MIC narratives. Well, I mean, right about what? Like, that's the thing. Is like, like, again, I've said that, like, I did not think that Putin would get to this extreme. But why we were worried about it, why we were really covering this, because it is worrying whenever you start to see, the saber rattling and the mobilizations, even if they might seem purely symbolic. It doesn't take much for something like this to escalate, which is why it's worrying. Even though, again, I'm hoping that this, conflict doesn't spread even more. But it's worrying that NATO is mobilizing into America, sending more troops into Germany. NATO is mobilizing for its first time ever ground troops. Like that's very, very frightening. And doesn't necessarily mean that, like, a large scale Eastern Front style war is necessarily about to happen. It's worrying, right? Um, and the people who are, like, now sort of loudly claiming that they were right, it's like, well, right about what? Because the thing that has always been my position at least, was that we should be opposing war and anything that is escalating this conflict, and we should be pursuing de-escalation at every level. And we did the opposite of that, frankly. And again, that doesn't let off Putin's madness, because he participates in escalating the situation and then finished it by this horrible descent and ground invasion. But right about what? I mean, for months now we've been hearing kind of very, very outlandish and debunked and disproven stories coming from mainstream media and from the American government. uh right. I mean, remember when we were talking about how there was a coup that was ongoing in Ukraine? That was something that the British intelligence put out there. That never happened, right? If you believe that, were those people right? It's just funny, the things that people are sort of claiming right now. But again, I think that there's also a certain point where um, the scorekeeping on that level, I find to actually be quite distasteful, in the sense of this is not an abstract thing. This is real crisis, and people who are trying to, in my opinion, de-escalate the situation are right, both politically and morally, on that. Um, And Rachel says folks were taken by surprise there as well. I mean, yeah, and it's just like, I wanted to come out here and do this stream and sort of talk through some things, but, like, we're all just sort of, like, recollecting on a lot of this stuff too. Um, I might need to scroll down to the bottom. I'm sorry if I missed questions. I'll try to come back up, because I can already tell that I'm about 10 minutes behind y'all with the questions. So I just talked about the NATO stuff. I wish I could sort by. I mean, I will say, I think Giannis Varoufakis has a very strong position on this. That's the correct one. He tweeted out earlier today, the only issue that should be to stop the war and to secure the withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukraine. The only way that's going to happen is a Washington-Moscow agreement that Russia withdraws in exchange for a commitment on Ukrainian neutrality. I think that that is the position that we must take, and particularly in the U.S. right now. We can get into more of that later. There there is a lot more appetite, than I've ever seen before for the continuation, the extension of this human disaster by getting the American military or NATO more largely involved. So I think domestically right now, it's if you're an American, it should be you know, Putin out of Ukraine, accept all and every refugee. Anybody who wants to come to this country should be able to, to be given a visa and to stay as long as they need or would like. Um, and three, America should immediately open up the diplomatic channels the with the expressed interest of negotiating on the question of neutrality and an end to NATO expansion. Right. I think at this point, what needs to happen is the end to this bloodshed and conflict, and I think that that's the only real position that you can be taking right now. Um, and I would agree with that, and I'll say, Rachel, it makes me very happy to see you in the chat. I'm sorry I'm not able to catch all your messages as they're coming through. Mario says NATO expansion shouldn't have happened. I'll put these up actually so people can see them. NATO expansion shouldn't have happened. Agreed, but I think that while it might have helped to shape these conditions, I don't think we should both sides. Pull the trigger. I don't think that it's both sidesing to just sort of explain the context as to how we got in here. There's no doubt about it. Who the one who put the standoff into an actual shooting war was? It's Putin, undoubtedly. And not that I feel like I need to say this again, but just to be explicit for folks who might not be familiar with what we say or what I think, you know, Putin is a right wing authoritarian in a system that has been in complete decline. There's a lot of factors as to why that's the case, but this is there are some real Looney Tunes out there who are talking about how Putin's expansion and invasion of another country is some kind of anti-imperialist act, and that is some of the most delusional stuff ever. That's a very very small segment of people, but usually I ignore that group of folks. But when we get into this kind of moment, I think it's actually really you have to condemn those folks because they can be quite dangerous and they can distract people who generally want to pursue anti-war politics. But get distracted into this. Um, all this. But anyways, Mario just said that they deleted this. um, okay. Yeah. The fact is that the NATO, the NATO expansion, it should have been eradicated after the Cold War for sure. It's been very dangerous. All right, let me keep up with y'all. This is about Texas. Hey, David, my sister's not heard back from gender specialists for my niece since Abbott's anti-trans law. Do you think this will hamper endocrinologists the same as abortion clinics? I will say, I have to admit my ignorance. I don't know what kind of a doctor procedure that is, but I mean, there's no doubt about it that doctors have seen that Texas is becoming a snitch state. And one that's encouraged by the government to be a snitch state. So it's very very worrying. I mean, the point of this is to chill people. The point of this is to terrorize people. Um, and again, like, no, I think you can. So I want to respectfully, disagree here. You can't say Putin pulled the trigger and honor the victories of Maidan and the folks in Donbass suffering blood losses. You're revealing a bias. There is no doubt that you can make the point about what's happened in eastern Ukraine to Russian speaking people. That does not justify this kind of madness of an overall land invasion. And I think believing those are like this is Putin's argument right now essentially is that they're trying to, what is it called, denazify Ukraine. They're trying to save the people in eastern Ukraine from human rights abuses. I mean, this is the interventionist playbook. I mean, they learned this very much from American interventions abroad, right? You can understand the fact that yes, there is conflict in eastern Ukraine, and there is abuse of Russian-speaking people, without falling for the madness of believing that those pretenses for war that Putin is using to make the the inexcusable seem excusable. That's BS, and I don't think that it's helpful to anybody. To mirror those kind of arguments, because I think that they are they're quite delusional at this point. Um, I'm going to read these questions are all sort of similar, so I'm going to go through them real quick. This is from Twitch. Camel's back was purposefully broken by Putin. He didn't have to do what he did. That said, the U.S. didn't have to try and call that bluff. I think that that's one of the big dangers here. Second question from YouTube is, David, do you think the allegations that Russia is fascist is warranted, or is it just corporatist oligarchy aristocracy? And then our friend um, here, let me see. Um, we can go through this as well. Um, Rachel makes the point, and I think that's probably a fair correction, is that there's not discrimination against people for speaking Russian. There is discrimination against Donbass natives. They're like Ukraine's deep south mixed with Detroit. I appreciate the correction there. And again, none of that excuses any kind of invasion or bloodshed. I mean, the thing is, like, Putin is looking for. I mean, it's like the same thing with the Nazi stuff. It's like there is no doubt that there are extreme, far right movements in Ukraine, and I think that people shouldn't get comfortable with accepting that as a political reality in that society. But to believe one, there's a massive expansion of what that reality is from, for example, what Putin is saying, and then from somewhat very strange characters in the U.S. I don't even know what to call them, because I think left would be unfair to the left. The point is not to say that these things don't exist on any level. It's just that with this excuse that you're getting from Putin is complete nonsense. And you shouldn't fall for the trap of somebody like that being able to point at problems out of society and then say, like, well, this is why I accept and support invasion and bloodshed. I think that that's a huge mistake to make as well. But I wanted to say on this point that we were about to mention a second earlier, is that the bluff, right? What's gone on about um about the question about what's gone on. Like there's a game here that I want to put out, right, and I want people to understand this, is that there's no doubt about it that what has happened over this past week um has felt really unthinkable. And Putin really took things to a level of extremes that I think a lot of us, myself included, are still very shocked by. um and he's playing a game, just like people in the West are playing a game as well. And I think it's important to recognize particularly the role of people are talking about, like, the U.S. sanctions, for example, sort of missing or not stopping fossil fuel imports that are going into Europe. And the reasons for that is because people in Europe are still heavily reliant on that to power their homes. And they know that the moment that could those that flow of payments could stop without any preparation, could lead to a kind of electrical disaster like we saw here in Texas, right? um, like, and you have to understand that there's these games. And for the Americans, we saw this earlier, and we noted this about 3 weeks ago, the last time we did an episode on Ukraine, Russia, was making the point that more and more, these states that are sort of on the periphery, there's not as much upside to necessarily being embedded in the American sphere, right? Economically, at least. And um for the Americans, what that means is that you need to, find ways to make that be like the only actual viable option. And trying to push Putin into an unacceptable position. I'm talking before the invasion, even. Um, right. Only allows more opportunity for American capital interests and financial interests in those parts of the world. Right. So, I you can imagine a scenario where there was maybe a conscious attempt to try to get Putin into a situation where, as you saw happen, like Nord 2 and different kind of contracts were breaking down because of Putin's aggression. Again, we're talking before the invasion, and that maybe being the end goal of the kind of West's refusal to negotiate and on some of these things, and also participating in inflaming the situation. And I think the difficult moment that we're seeing right now, if that's the case, is that, well, what ended up happening was Putin was willing to take it very, very much further than I think people expected. I think there might have been a hope that Putin could sort of be exposed for being reckless. And that might mean that there is sort of pushback of Russian, like, par- primarily like fossil fuel interests and financial interests in other countries, and having those sort of be replaced, particularly with American or Western European ones. But if that were the case, it certainly has backfired in quite a painful way. And I just think it's important to remember that as these things are happening, it's normal people who get stuck in the crosshairs of this thing. And it's been a really horrible, right before our eyes example of what happens with these kind of great power struggles, is that it wraps up everyday people into just the horrors and the the misery of war. And I hope that we're able to see a quick withdrawal and end to this. But it's looking really bad, frankly. And I can't confidently say that I don't think that things might get much worse in the near future. um so, political pain says, do you think the left should reconsider how they viewed Russia during the Trump years because of this? Not asking for saber rattling, but a more cynical view toward Putin and Russia. I mean, at least on my end, like, you know, I don't think you need to have a cynical view of Russia. I mean, I think you need to recognize what that state was, which was a state that has almost been completely captured by a very, very small, capitalist class of billionaires that owe favors, to the people in power. And there's been a complete stifling of democracy and civil society, which is why it's so encouraging and inspiring to see people standing up against war in Russia. Um, but I don't know exactly what you mean, or what sections of the left you mean. So it's hard to speak more widely about that. Yeah, I think what we're seeing too, the decommissioning of those nuclear plants is, I think, is a very tragic. We're seeing the consequences of that today, no doubt. Yeah, and I mean, well, this is the point, and that there is just no doubt. I mean, look at what the freaks are doing. Like, let me just pull this up right quick for y'all. Um, uh, my dog's getting a little jealous. Usually, I put him away so he doesn't come and try to break in. Um, by the way, I don't know if people really paid attention to statements. I know there's so much coming in. Cory Bush by far has the best statement on the Russia Ukraine situation um, from uh, from Congress. Oh, Lord, I can't find it right now, but just look at what Kristi Noem is saying a strong leader would do, and it's just all about expanding and extending American drilling and forcing pipeline projects in America to be finished. Right, there are vultures here who want to take advantage of the situation. If you go on American media, um, you know it's been unbelievable how many representatives of the API, the American Petroleum Institute, have been just brought on national TV and interviewed by national publications to give their opinions on the crisis and what they think should be done about it, including everything from major networks to like local news. Um, there are a lot of vultures who are looking to capitalize off of this crisis, and I think that it's very, very worthwhile noting that, especially as we're looking at what got us to the situation in the first bit. Um, Robbie says, and I appreciate the chat. Says, "Man, I'm glad you and Matt continued y'all's works together. Shows coming along very nicely. Solidarity with the people of Ukraine. I appreciate that." Um, I'm trying to get back down to these. Um, do y'all think Wall Street corporate interests are responsible for Biden not pursuing stronger sanctions aimed at the oligarchs and Putin himself? Well, I think the bigger problem is that they're too embedded in the American and particularly British like financial and real estate markets. Um, I think they're getting quite concentrated now, but at this point, for those effects to really be felt, it won't do very much. I think in actually curtailing the conflict. I mean, like targeted sanctions against, bank sanctions against, Putin and his allies, right? Um, and as we noted earlier, there's hesitation about doing anything that might stop the flow of fossil fuels into Europe or Western Europe generally from the east. Um, and I would echo people in the chat. Mario says the Green Party has been in power, so you can't blame them. They haven't been in power in 17 years. This is on SP Day and Merkel. Fair enough. It's not my dog. It's my mom's. I'm watching it for her. Again, I think what we have to hope for and argue for is um, so I would definitely disagree with this friend Payne. The rejection of Russiagate story by many of the left, that has nothing to do with what this reality is. And I think you'd be making a mistake to make a connection or a line from Putin's invasion of Ukraine to this very, very spurious allegation that there is this that Hillary Clinton loses in 2016 because of some kind of coordinated effort by Russians to post like bad memes. I mean, the memes that like look at what they actually were putting out there. I mean, it was complete garbage. It had no effect other than making it seem maybe like Russia has more um, power that they can, like power on the internet, for example, that they could project. But no, in fact, I think that the RussiaGate stuff and the willingness of a lot of liberals to fall for that has only made the situation worse on the American side and conflict much, much more likely. I mean, I don't know if y'all saw Eric Sowell, that little guy going on talking about how there should be rounding up and firings of Russians in America. I mean, um, like actual like targeting of like American/Russians joint American and Russian citizens here. I mean, that's really worrying stuff, and should be condemned absolutely. And that comes out of the kind of RussiaGate fantasy. Doesn't That shit didn't make anybody safer. In fact, that made the world much less safe. Not only because of the rhetoric change, but you also start to get into a situation where people are just believing these kind of like outlandish, far fetched lies. That was not helpful at all. Um, and Payne says, that Solwell stuff was insane, and Rachel says swallow whale, which is pretty good. um, Vladimir says they had sent me a message about sharing something with me. I'd be happy to see it. I don't know if I saw that message, so I can't speak to that. Um, hmm. Um, well, Strom says Russian capital is horrified of the prospect of a move away from petrochemicals, as is the American ruling class, I must say. Um, And speaking about the UK, Rachel says Bojo Borisov says never going to attack the root of the problem of Russian influence in the UK. It's his bread and butter. No, I agree. And like this is the thing, that went into some of my thinking about like the weird irony of what's happened in Russia over the past 30 years has been, early on, the American effort to stifle democracy in that country to make sure that you know the people who were in power as loyal to us as they could be, then that ending up backfiring in a very anti-democratic way via Putin. But the great irony about the politics of Russia is that the economics, sort of go in this way. There is mass kind of pillaging of the natural resources and of the wealth and labor of people in Russia by a small group of extremely wealthy billionaires. But what do those people do with their money? They bring it into American capital markets. They bring it into real estate. They bring it into buying football teams or soccer teams like Chelsea, right? Like the thing that's very wild about Russia's, even though like in some ways politically it's been more isolated, so many of those people have the wealthy of that country have ended up being like major global players. Um, which like is why as to notice like it's why Johnson is sort of cowardly about coming at these folks. Um, I think that this is Mario says, what should Germany do? Keep buying up gas from Russia and fill up Russia's war chest. I mean, this is the problem of the situation. I can't give you a prescription right now, in all fairness, about what Germany's energy policy should be. But this is just a recognition of, you know, the very serious need to pursue alternative forms of, powering our society. And I think that more and more it's becoming clear that nuclear is something that we certainly need. And I think it was been a mistake, this kind of war on nuclear that we've seen, um, even from people amongst the left. And that's a change that I've had over the past 5 years. Um, yeah, I mean, it's no war but class war, y'all. It's we support the Ukrainian people, we support the people of Russia who are fighting back. I mean, I think the one thing that's been notable has been the lack of war fervor within Russia. Has been quite significant, and not just from the popular movements, but even people who are sort of embedded in the Russian ruling class. That doesn't mean anything necessarily right now, but it does create a hopefully opportunity for there to be pressure and movement away from this disastrous war. Uh, well, thank you. Let me see. So I could talk. I would love to talk about democratic socialism and other forms of thought. Maybe another time, um, friend. So I didn't put it up, but I'm just trying to keep up with everybody's questions here. I mean, I have to say that like the actual decision to invade in this way has just uh, continued been shocking. I think it's been shocking to most. And I think, recognizing where we were wrong in our calculations is very crucial. I also think it's a mistake to say, oh, well, we were wrong about, Russia being prepared to pursue the madness of war. That shouldn't then change our position to wanting to see an extension of that conflict. And I have to, I have to urge people in the U.S. is like it is obviously encouraging to see Biden say that they don't want to pursue any kind of military involvement, but just because they say one thing today doesn't mean that there's not a possibility in the future. And I think it's really important to stand as strong as possible against further American intervention abroad, or NATO intervention, because that could just be absolutely disastrous. And you just don't know what's going to happen, especially when you are starting to see the calls. Earlier this week, there were not that many people who were calling for actual armed, um, a military option in that area in the U.S. And now that dam is starting to crack. And I think it's important to, for the anti-war movement to be able to stand, stand very strong on this, especially given the extent that we have a Democratic um, party president, which means um, that like a lot of the organizations that were sort of set up to oppose the Iraq War, which could be sort of painted as a Republican war, they might not be as quick, to condemn, escalation from the Biden administration. Sure, I appreciate you. I think soon I'm gonna have to get somebody else on here to help me make sure I'm able to get through the chats. It's great to have so many voices, but it's hard for me to follow. Um, Strom says green liberal politics is a big problem. Yeah. Um, I'm falling down. The poor guy. He just wants to get in. I would let him in, but he would cause too much havoc in here. I promise you. Well, look, can I share? I'm gonna keep watching the chat, but let me share a couple things. I'm at the bottom now, so I'm up to date. So I'm happy to answer some questions. But I want to shout out, some people who I think have been really good, and I would continue to read. Daniel Denver, of course, has been great. Bronco Marchich has been really solid on this throughout. Um, he I think is quite fearless in telling the truth on the subject without wearing rose colored glasses or anything else. Um, Mario wants to know. My mom it's not my dog. It's the family's dog. It's my mom's. My mom's has a really adorable poodle called Ragnar, who is the cutest dog, but is also just like a complete alpha, which is the funniest combination. You have to be careful when I take him out because he takes defending the family very, very seriously. But he's also a real friendly critter, and he doesn't like to be alone. Um, I will say I have not watched all of Ben's Rogan chat, but it's very fun to have him in town. And it seems like I was very happy to see. I remember before it went live, Ben was telling me that he was very happy to see that Joe Rogan not only said positive things about Michael, but clearly was familiar with that work that Michael was doing when he noted that. Um, without any prompting from Ben, how good he thought Michael Brooks's impressions were. Which I thought was sweet, and I think would have definitely made Michael happy because I know he really did want to get onto that program. I thought he could do a lot of good on it. Um, Michael Roberts, yeah. You know, to be fair, even though Joe Rogan did call him Michael Roberts, you know, he did apologize later and said he meant Michael Brooks, which is pretty funny. And yeah, Joe Rogan certainly should have had Michael on when he had the chance. Um, well, Sean says when the Berlin Wall came down and the Warsaw Pact collapsed, why did NATO disband and why did it extend? Well, we all know it's because a lot of people in the American security establishment um, and power in this country want to rub Russia's nose in the dissolution of the USSR, and you know the loss of the of the adversary of the American state didn't mean that the Americans were less interested in continuing their expansion. And we're living in the consequences of that today. And I think you have to understand this as part of a 30-year crisis that you know there are created this kind of tinderbox of a situation that Putin ended up making the most disastrous move. But the board had been set long before earlier this week, right? And I think that that's the thing that's really important for us to understand. 40s gangster HRC was a great character. Yeah, I mean, I'm a classics guy myself. I think Nation of Islam Obama, like just as a concept, was definitely one of my favorites. Um, but his Hillary Clintons were really good. I think he was doing more Hillary before I met him, though. I must say, obviously, when that election was going down. Mm. So I'm still keeping up with the chat, but I don't want to give it too much attention. But I do want to say very quickly, um, the little weirdos at this point, who for the most part we just ignore, are playing a very very dangerous game. So I'm talking about that kind of group of like lefty streamers who sort of paint themselves off as if they're communists, but seem to have a very very tenuous grasp of Marx and Lenin. Who are actively defending Russia's aggression and disastrous war. Those people need to one shut up and certainly take Lenin out of your mouth. I mean, one of the things that is just so amazing to me um, is these groups of people who sort of consider themselves to be anti-imperialists in the using the terminology of like Lenin's conception of imperialism. Um, you know, supporting somebody and supporting an intervention that started with Putin explicitly saying that one of the greatest mistakes of Lenin was recognizing the importance of sovereignty and independence for nations like Ukraine, right? You can't hold those two ideas together to say, on one hand, that this is some kind of anti imperialist action, right? Which again is delusional on its face. But you can't, like, you explicitly can't do it at this point when the orchestrator behind it is saying that he's doing this clearly in opposition to like the historical legacy of Lenin, who made the correct call at the beginning of the Soviet Union to allow to create and allow this kind of sovereignty for states within the Union. That's just ridiculous. I don't want to fixate on them because I don't think that they really represent a large chunk of any kind of movement or people. But it's worth calling out just because I find it to be extremely damaging to our movement, and also to like the actual anti-imperialist and anti-war legacy of people in the communist movement, whatever you think of them. Um, you know, it's truly, I think it's just ridiculous at this point. And I think more and more people are seeing through it because those people aren't, anti-war. Uh, they seem to just be willing to say almost anything. Uh, and I think that's some pretty bad complicity in things. Mm. I'm what I'm going to say right now about those people. I don't like. There's some people who get like spend a lot of time thinking or like reading or watching their stuff. I don't. So I can't say too much more other than the fact that I think that anyone who is actually like trying to positively describe themselves as a socialist or an anti-imperialist who's supporting Russian a land invasion in another country, uh, yeah, I think it's pretty fucking delusional. Um, and if anything, take like Lenin's name out of your mouth, take anti-imperialism out of your mouth, take the word socialism and the communist movement out of your mouth. Um, because if you want to create your own kind of bizarre nasty movement that is supporting these kind of things, fine. um I'll condemn you and argue with you on that, but don't also say that this is a kind of extension of very proud anti-war positions and people. I find that to just be um you know extremely offensive. Hmm. You can go on my Twitter. You can find at least one of them who I retweeted. I didn't go through the entire. Who I asked if who's openly supporting the invasion. Go on. You can go on my Twitter. I've pointed out some of them, and I'll be. I can promise you right now that there's a whole rogues gallery of folks, um, the kind of usual suspects, unfortunately. Well, I don't know if this is coming at me, but we've been talking pretty explicitly about the extent of the American role historically in creating the conditions that helped Putin come to power. Um, we got cheers from our friends Joshua. Thank you very much for the chat there. Well, I appreciated being able to talk with everybody. Okay. Um, I appreciated being able to talk with everybody. We got a lot. Obviously, we'll be watching this very closely. I think it was helpful to get out here. I mean, I wasn't even able to get through everything that we had in our notes. Um, just want to see if there's anything I want to say before we leave. Um, I mean, there's almost too much for me to open up any of these. I will say, I found most of the statements to be from sort of bad to okay. From our kind of elected officials, I thought the best one by far was Cory Bush. Um, the AOC one, I think, was a little worrying. It seemed the squad's line is that they support, like targeted bank sanctions and asset freezing of Putin and his political allies. They're against large scale economic sanctions for the people of Russia, and they want um, Biden not to approve military action without consulting Congress. I think it could be a lot better than that, but obviously there could be a worse version of it. Um, I think in this country it's time to the next steps are very simple. The call today is for the withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukraine, and Washington and Russia, the United States and Russia, should open up negotiations with the uh, making it explicit that NATO expansion is off the table, so that we can start moving toward rebuilding and peace. Unfortunately, I think things have accelerated to such a point that the off ramps feel more and more unlikely. But all that we can do is advocate against sending more people into conflict, and advocate for the end of this barbaric war, and in America, and across the across people who live in countries that are listening to this, say that you are welcome and willing to extend aid and acceptance of any and all refugees. Um, not just as much, not just from Ukraine, but from everywhere. Um, please take care. Please take care, Rachel, and everyone out there. I hope that um, people can be safe, and that this fucking nightmare can end soon. We got something coming out on Sunday, a very inspiring conversation actually about the Commune of St. Louis in 1877. Um, so keep your eye out for that. Love and solidarity, everybody. I will see you sometime next week.